months ago, NLA Houston began wondering who we should get to give our keynote address. We decided to ask a man by the name of Guy Baldwin to come and speak. Some people said no, we can't afford him. Others thought he wouldn't come. Some said, who's that? I remember asking the same question a long time ago. Guy Baldwin, who's that? The answers I got were often a list of titles he had won, usually starting with IML 1989. Depending on who I was talking to, I also got Mr. NLA 1898. Oops, sorry, typo. A couple of people have said, you better read one of his books, you idiot. He wrote the Leather Contest Guide. I know at least one person told me that he wrote a book called The Ties That Bind. Later, after I finished jacking off to a drummer magazine and actually started to read the articles in it, I noticed his name on one of the articles, and I found him in other magazines also. This thing's starting to sound like a eulogy instead of an introduction. Anyway, I started giving the same answers I had been given, but none of them really tell you who he is, because they're only quick and simple answers. Those are some of his accomplishments, but they don't tell you who he really is. I can tell you the guy is a psychotherapist in Los Angeles, a damn good one too. That he's old guard leather. He's been a member of the leather community since the 1960s. That he's one of the founders of the CAP list, the Kink-Aware Professionals. We'll rattle off a bunch of other facts about him, but that still doesn't cut it. The best introduction I can give is, please welcome my friend and our keynote speaker for Spring Iniquity 20, Mr. Guy Baldwin.
When birds of a feather let's see if I can get this all squared away. We didn't have the chance to do a sound check. Does that sound all right? Yes. Sort of? Okay. Well, greetings, everyone. And my thanks to the organizers who were kind enough to imagine that I might have something of value to say to you on this particularly fine Sunday morning. I must, of course, begin my remarks with a salute to the NLA Houston chapter on the occasion of your 20th anniversary. Well done. Nice. This is also, of course, the 25th anniversary of the formation of the National Leather Association back in 1986 in Seattle. As I was reflecting on my own history with the NLA, I actually remembered the phone call that I got from Tony DeBlas, who was at that time the editor of Drummer magazine, and who was also the educational program director for the Second Living in Leather. Tony had called to encourage me to fly up to Seattle and to teach classes there. And he was also anxious for me to meet the core founders of this new organization that he was very enthusiastic about, the National Leather Association. Tony was a good friend, so I was willing to help him out. I flew up taught 3 or 4 classes, I can't remember, at Lille, and met the core group that had organized this thing called the NLA. And thus began what would prove to be a long association with the group. Later, I became the 3rd Mr. National Leather Association in 1989, and then I won the International Mr. Leather title a few weeks later. That win gave me the opportunity to speak in the 28 cities that I visited that year, speaking opportunities which I used to bring attention to the NLA itself. NLA was also getting good press in the lifestyle publications of the day. And so it wasn't long before NLA chapters began to spring up from coast to coast. I want you all to know that Steve Madoff was the spark plug that ignited the NLA. Steve had been a contestant. Oh, thank you. I don't know who did that, but thank you. Steve had been a contestant at the International Mr. Leather title contest in Chicago in 1986. He competed in that contest as Mr. Washington State Leather and was sponsored by the J&L Saloon, a gay men's leather bar in Seattle. Now, Steve didn't win the IML competition that year, but he was sufficiently inspired by what happened to him as a contestant that he returned to Seattle resolved to infect other influential people in the Seattle area with his vision, which was to forge a national network of local organizations to support kinky people of all orientations. Now, such a thing had never existed before. Yes, the Eulenspiegel Society had been around since 1971 and was founded as an officially pansexual organization by a straight man, but in New York City. And yes, the Society of Janus had been around since 1974, and it too was officially a pansexual organization founded by a straight woman, but in San Francisco. So it's worth asking, what possessed Steve Madoff, a gay leatherman, to return to Seattle from his IML experience in Chicago and to spark plug the formation of the NLA? After all, in 1986, there were over 150 gay motorcycle clubs in the US alone, several of them in the Seattle-Tacoma area. And by 1986, every major city had at least 2 bars where gay leathermen were welcome, including, of course, Seattle. And because Steve had won the Mr. Washington State Leatherman title, it's safe to assume that he must have been reasonably well connected to the gay male leather fraternity in Seattle. I can certainly tell you that Steve wasn't a bad-looking guy at all. And I'm very sure that on any given weekend, he'd have had no trouble finding a good time for himself. What was in it for Steve Madoff? For that matter, what was in it for any of the gay leathermen who were in that core founders group? Well, since almost nothing of their personal papers survive, because 2 particular gay leathermen hadn't yet founded the Leather Archives and Museum where such personal papers might have ended up, The correct answer must be, we don't know. We can't know what he thought was in it for himself. I know that I never asked him.